In this video, I will show you how to set up branching in AtBot to give your bots the ability to flex and flow in and out of skills seamlessly, giving your bots some real conversational smarts. First off, let's take a look at how branching works and some of the things you'll want to consider. Branching is highly dependent on Lewis and a well-trained Lewis model. You'll want to make sure that your none intent is well-trained to not pick up false positives. Branching supports Q&A Maker, so you can branch out into Q&A Maker and get answers while you're inside of a skill. And then flow is really where you control whether or not you're allowed to branch, and then also sending data back to the branching skill from the one you branched to. So to put a picture to it, consider this skill. This middle column is a single skill. You trigger the skill, you do some things inside the flow, and you continue on. This middle part is what we call a get response. And you can branch out of most get responses. Get choice, get person, get adaptive card. And when you've set up that branching in flow, which I'm going to show a little bit later in the video, your well-trained Lewis model is going to be what's hit a lot during those get responses. So for example, a user, once they go into a get response, let's consider this maybe an adaptive card form that they were sent. They have a question that they might ask. That question is going to get sent to Q&A Maker while you're inside the get response, and then the answer is going to come back to the user, and then the scope is going to get passed back into the original skill. Let's say the user says something that kicks off a brand new skill. That can trigger a new skill while you're inside of a get response, which basically changes the scope of where the user's at in the conversation to the new skill, but remembering that other skill that's there in the background. This new skill can continue on, and then eventually it can return data back to the originating skill. All of this can happen multiple times inside of a get response before it moves on, and then get data and then continue on the skill. So enough with the slides, let's take a look how this really works. Let's start by having a look at an interaction that's made possible by branching. This test bot here, his name is Booker. I've created a few skills for him, and the whole idea here is a bot to help an internal organization plan events like internal training and things like that. So one of his main skills is to be able to plan an event. So I can ask him to help me plan an event. And that kicks off a skill that begins with an adaptive card form. Now, before we introduced branching, the user would be required to fill all this data out before they could move on. But from here, now that we have branching enabled, users can maybe ask questions or branch out in different directions if they don't know all the information that they want to put in here right now. So simple Q&A Maker type stuff. Which is just a simple question and answer, or Q&A Maker multi-turn is also supported in here. So the user has asked a few questions and they've gotten some data, but they still have a skill in the background that is waiting for them to come back. And so, you know, maybe they say something like, thanks, and where was I? So here we're able to bring them back to the skill that they're currently scoped at. And that's completely customizable, and I'll show you guys how to do that in a sec. So now, maybe I want to ask, so those were just simple Q&A Maker things. Maybe I want a little bit richer data, like, for example, what is my... Now I'm branching out into a completely different skill. So this is not Q&A Maker. This is branching out into a skill, potentially looking into my calendar and finding my free and busy. And in particular to this bot and what this bot can do, right? So for this bot, we're looking for availability whole day availability, and that's what it's coming back with. So, available all day, 1 conflict in the afternoon, 2 conflicts, etc. So when I click on one of these, it's really, really cool is that skill is now able to talk back to the skill that it branched from and fill in the date. Cool, right? So now that I've got that information, I got my Q&A maker information, I can fill all this out. And finish off that skill. Now let's have a look behind the scenes to see how all of this is put together. So the first piece that needs to be in place in order to allow branching to happen properly with an AtBot is a well-trained language model. So in Lewis, we have an app here called Booker Intents, I believe is what it's called. And there are 4 important intents in here, well actually 5. So plan an event is 1, check availability is 2, back to skill is 3, and then the none intent is the 4th one that's really, really important. I guess there's only 4 that are really important. Some of these other ones I was testing and doing some things, but those are the ones that we saw used in chat with the bot. So plan an event was the initial one. When I said help me plan an event, that was the intent, to plan the event. When I said what's my availability next week, it used the check availability intent. When I said where was I, to go back to the scope of the original skill, that was the back to skill intent. And then in order to make it into Q&A Maker, because if you look at the order of operations of how AtBot works, where keywords are first, then Lewis, then Q&A Maker, we need to have a properly trained none intent so that when people are asking questions that might exist in Q&A Maker, it'll make it there and it won't get caught by one of these other intents. So those intents are wired up in AtBot. You can see here in the Booker intents. This get some data. I think I was just doing some testing. But these 3 here, check availability, back to skill, and plan event, those are all Lewis intent vectors that are lined up. Then in flow, we have our plan event. So when the user said, help me plan an event, it triggered this skill with this Lewis intent vector, which is plan event. And the new property that you have to set to allow for branching is down in the advanced properties, which is simply allow branching, yes or no. It will default to no. So you have to specifically or explicitly define which get responses you can branch out of. And that's by design, especially for backwards compatibility. We didn't want some unwanted behavior to have you branching out when you really wanted to make sure you collect the correct data from the user. So with allow branching set to yes, users can say pretty much anything after this get adaptive card response form is sent to them in Teams, and it will go out to Q&A Maker or it will kick off another skill until they submit that form. So the on the Q&A Maker side, there isn't a whole lot special in there. It's just a Q&A Maker with multi-turn, no other special settings. It's just supported. From a flow perspective and skill perspective, so there were the 2 skills, back to skill and check availability. So we did check availability first, right? So I was on the form and I said, what's my availability next week? If I go into the check availability skill, you'll see that this is simply a skill defined as a Lewis intent vector tied into my check availability. I send them some choices. Now I hard-coded these, but again, you could go to some data source to get availability for this user. And you can see down here in my send reply, so I'm providing a choice list to the user. Remember we saw those 3 choices, and I clicked, I believe I clicked June 4th. And then in the send reply, we can do this. There's a new field called signal response JSON, and you can send a response that's going to be sent back up to the skill that it branched from. if we take a quick look at the documentation, I'll show you where you can see how to properly form these. It's in the send reply. We have a reference down here. You can see that for adaptive cards, you send it like this. For people values, like this: choice list, choice, date, and then this special ask again one, which I'll show you in just a sec. For this particular one, we're sending back the event date form value for the adaptive card. This should be any form field that you would have in your adaptive card. So for example, if I bring that adaptive card form up, which is plan event, you'll see under form properties, event date is one of the properties. I could also send back event name, room, description, date, or any of those. But in this case, I'm just sending back event date to populate that. So then the last skill that we used was the where was I, or go back to the scope that I'm at. Basically kind of remind the user where they're at. And that is this one. So this is a Lewis intent vector called back to skill. If we take a look at the utterances for this, it's basically, a user saying, how do I, I want to go back to the scope that I was at before I asked all of these questions and got answers. So where was I? Ask again, previous question. What did you need from me? What did you ask? Those kinds of things is what we're looking for there. And when this triggers, basically we just tell them, hold on a sec, let me pull that up, and we send the signal response JSON of ask again equals true. And all that does is just pops whatever, wherever you were at, it'll pop the question back in. So if it's an adaptive card form, it'll pop that form back down there at the bottom of the Teams dialog. If you were in the middle of a get person, it'll pop where you were for that. If you were in the middle of a get choice, it'll pop that down there with the choices there too. So it's just an easy way to bring that back into focus. And that's about it. I know I mentioned most of this in Teams, but it's also supported in Web Chat v4, so the direct line bots. And yeah, I hope this video is informative and can get you started on adding branching to your bots and making them just that much smarter. Thanks for watching.